All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Frank Allman. I have the honor of being the Chief Judge here in the Second Judicial Circuit. And on behalf of all the judges and court staff here in the Second Circuit, I want to welcome you and thank you for attending this retirement celebration for Circuit Judge John C. Cooper. We have many judges and other elected officials and dignitaries here, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to introduce them individually. If you all just give us a wave if you're important or you think you're. I am, however, going to introduce Judge Cooper's family. Unfortunately, Paula, his wife, is not feeling well. She's not able to be here, but daughter Ann Cooper is here, sitting in the front row. Welcome, Ann. Came all the way from North Carolina. And then we have Karen Wurzberger and her husband, Morgan, came all the way from Paris. That's France, not Texas. They came all the way from France. So this is a bittersweet occasion for the judges and staff who have worked with Judge Cooper for the last 23 years. We congratulate him on a truly outstanding judicial career, and we wish him well in the future. But we are going to miss his expertise, his passion for the law, his dedication to the hard work that it takes to be a circuit judge, and for his ever-present sense of humor, which we have either experienced or endured, how you want to look at it. Just a little history. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but Judge Cooper is a double Seminole, graduating with honors from Florida State University with a BA degree and also a law degree from the College of Law. He was Phi Beta Kappa, Phi Alpha Theta, and Phi Delta Phi. That's a lot of Phis. Before taking the bench, Judge Cooper practiced law for 27 years, and he did it in virtually every conceivable facet of the law: criminal, civil, personal injury, products liability, land use, banking, and more. In addition to being a 50-year member of the Florida Bar, he's been admitted to practice in federal district courts and federal circuit courts of appeal, and even the United States Supreme Court. Judge Cooper is a board-certified civil trial lawyer. He has an AV rating with Martindale-Hubbell. That's the highest possible rating that you can have. And he's also a certified circuit mediator. Throughout his career, he has twice been honored by ABOTA as the Trial Judge of the Year. He's received the ABOTA President's Distinguished Jurist Award and the Thurgood Marshall Award. Now, as we learn in New Judges School, there are two kinds of judges in the world: those who have been reversed and those who will be reversed. So I'm not going to say that Judge Cooper has never been reversed, but I thought it was worth mentioning all of the times he was reversed while serving in the criminal division. 0. All the times he was reversed in the delinquency. 0. Dependency. 0. In fact, he was never reversed in any case where he held a jury trial. And that is a remarkable achievement. So it's even more remarkable when you think that he has done that in the past several years with some health challenges. Now, given the number of people here in the room, there may be 2 or 3 of you who haven't heard about his health challenges. So I thought for those of you, I would detail them. I was able to go to ChatGPT and download this avatar of Judge Cooper. This might have been taken during his first year, so I'll go through these very specifically. That was my plan, but in the interest of But honestly, in all seriousness, his reputation and record as a truly phenomenal circuit judge speaks to the hours of preparation he put in before his hearings and for the thorough and thoughtful writing of his orders that he did after. And that's despite all of these challenges. And even though this is kind of a joke, he's had a lot to deal with. So, John, you set the bar very high for all of us. We are going to miss you. At this time, I would like to introduce the first of our speakers, and that is Barry Richard, attorney at law. Uh-oh. I thought we were going to make it.
So we're going to do this a little different because I will be introducing the speakers today. But is Dr. Monosophy here? All right. Dr. Faisal Monosophy is a psychiatrist here in town who may have saved my life 2 years ago. I had shingles on the face. Nobody could figure it out. I went to the hospital. I had CT scans. I had the worst headaches I'd ever had. The only person who diagnosed me before the doctor was Judge Smith. He says, John, I think you've got shingles. I says, Lane, you're not a doctor. So finally, after I spent all day one Saturday in the hospital being examined from head to toe, and they said, can't do anything for you, I left. Sunday was worse. Monday was terrible. I couldn't get anybody on the phone. I knew I needed a neurologist. I thought I was having a migraine. So I called my friend Faisal Monosophy, who I first met in the 80s when he was the doctor for a client of ours who had been horribly attacked in an apartment complex. We had a lawsuit. He was a witness. I got to know him through that. Later became friends with him. I did a little business work for him as a lawyer. We both went to Premier Gym and we saw each other there from time to time. And whenever I need a doctor, that's who I call. And he usually sends me to his doctors, which is good. I called him up and told the number, says, he knows me. I am terribly sick and I'm getting worse. I need to speak to a doctor. He calls me 5 minutes later. He says, John, this is beyond the competence of a general practitioner. I will get you a neurologist in 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, I had an appointment with Dr. Winston Ortiz. Next day I walked in, he says, you don't have a migraine. You got, what Lane diagnosed? Shingles. And he gave me medication. I started getting better immediately. My wife took pictures of me. She sent it around to family and friends. There were vaccinations being received all over North Florida. My friend Jack Campbell can give you further details. But he's a special person, and he really made a difference. So, Frank. So I've known Frank for about 10, well, I've known Frank for longer than 10 years, but worked with Frank for 10 years. And we developed this habit of eating lunch in the same place. And we talk about work. We usually talk about sports, jokes, or whatever. We tell the same jokes repeatedly and laugh louder every time we tell the joke. Kevin Carroll was in our group, and we call the lunch location the DDR. Where's Charlie Dodson? That's short for the Dodson Dining Room. And it's because when he was on that side of the courthouse where Frank and I are, David Frank's over there, Lee Marsh is over there, we call that the cool side. And when Charlie was over there, he had all his hearings in the hearing room there. And somehow we associated that room with Charlie in it. And I don't really know why. And I don't know anybody really knows why, but it started being called the Dodson Dining Room. And now it's just the DDR. And so it's in his honor. But I've got to tell you Kevin Carroll's story. Frank, this is not confidential. Frank told part of it at his funeral, but I'm going to tell you the rest of it. We come around every 2 years and we have preference sheets, which were passed out to give our judicial preferences. And every year I put civil, 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 Leon. I walk into the then chief judge and he says, I am so happy that you've volunteered for family law. And he showed me a preference sheet that says family, 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 any county in the circuit. I don't care. And it had my name signed on it, which it was a forgery. And I told the chief judge it was a forgery. And so he said, okay. And then I tried to figure out who did this. And I thought and thought and thought and thought. And one Sunday afternoon, Kevin and I always talked on Sunday afternoon. When he was in criminal, he came in and worked on his criminal cases Sunday afternoon, and I was there. We chat about all kinds of things. And I says, Kevin, you've heard about this assignment thing, haven't you? He said, yeah, I heard about it. I said, I think I figured out who did it. He said, who? I said, it's clear to me that Frank Allman did it because he's the only one with the sense of humor to carry that off. Kevin says, stop, John. I did it. And ever since, he'd come up to me every couple of weeks, says, we okay? But look, we all were great friends and still are. We got along well. Kevin was special. So when we have these things go on, there's a lot of pressure in this job, and we have to relieve it some way by humor and get our minds off the realistic trauma of what we do. But Kevin was special because he knew every episode of the Andy Griffith Show ever made. He watched them every day. And one of his favorites and mine was when Barney was talking to the prisoners that the state police had brought in. He said, here at The Rock, we have two rules. Rule number one, obey all rules. Rule number two, do not write on the walls, as it is hard to get handwriting off the walls. We just told, Frank can tell you, we just retold that story a couple of days ago. And Kevin loved that show. Also, Kevin and I got into this thing where we would take common expressions and state them wrong on purpose. He would, the I'm not a rocket scientist expression, Kevin would say, I'm not a brain scientist all the time. He never said, I'm not a rocket scientist. And our favorite, which we still do now, is when you've reversed your position on something. Most people say, I've done a 180. Kevin and I said we did a 360. Judge Dempsey would always correct us. She said, it's a 180. We'd say, we think you're wrong about that. We think it's a 360. We did that the other day. Frank did. Another judge said, it's a 180. And he said, no, I think you're wrong about that. It's 360. And the one which I'm going to take part credit, instead of you're preaching to the choir, we would say you're preaching to the frying pan. It meant nothing, but we liked it. They knew it was coming from us. So anyway, that's some of the humorous stuff we do. Now let's get to Barry Richard. Barry's the first speaker. I knew of Barry Richard 50 plus years ago when he and I both had black hair. I was in law school. We went over, I don't recall if it was the legislature at the Capitol or at the first DCA, which then was in the bottom of the Supreme Court. But we went to hear this Deputy Attorney General speak about the practice of law. And this guy was energetic, full of enthusiasm. And I asked the guy next to me, who is this guy? He says it's somebody named Barry Richard. And little did I know that he would become an internationally famous attorney in Bush versus Gore. I'm sorry, but for those of you who don't know, that was a lawsuit about the presidential election. Or that someday I would actually be a judge, which never occurred to me, and that I would have a number of cases that Barry Richard was presenting his client's case. And then I realized why my former law partner, Dexter Douglas, who was on the other side of Barry, never said, you'll have to ask Janice if she has other evidence, never said a negative word about Barry to me during that whole process. Now, I wasn't in the firm then, but I did talk to him. And if Dexter didn't say a negative word about somebody he was in combat with, he highly respected that person. And he did tell Barry, the Democratic lawyer who came down from Washington, D.C., when he got off the plane, the first thing he told him is this: you need a haircut. So with that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce Barry Richard. The floor is yours, Barry.
I think that being a judge must be a lonely business. Lawyers, friends, are mostly other lawyers because normal people don't like to be seen with us. And so when judges put the robe on, there's suddenly a distance between them and other lawyers. And lawyers that they've known for many years start calling them judge and don't use their first name anymore. They spend most of their time in the courtroom or in their chambers or in the Lively Cafe at St. George Church, which is where I saw Judge Cooper and Judge Dempsey not too long ago. And Judge Cooper told us that he had recently had a knee replacement and that he was still having pain, to which I responded, "Man up, Judge." Then I saw Judge Dempsey several days later, and she said, "I loved it when you told Judge Cooper to man up." Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this for this reason. I felt comfortable telling Judge Cooper to man up, and Judge Dempsey loved it because of a trait that he has that's important if you're going to be a judge: humility. He doesn't become offended at good-natured humor at his expense, and more importantly, he recognizes that he, like most of us, is not infallible. And so he has the confidence to rule from the bench, but he also has the willingness to reverse himself when he's convinced that he made a mistake. When you add that to the fact that he is intelligent, conscientious, fair, and that he treats everybody in his courtroom with respect and courtesy, you have the recipe for a great judge. Those of us who practice in the Second Circuit regularly are going to miss having him on the bench. And I look forward to having lunch with him and getting to the point where I feel comfortable calling him John.
Now that he said that, I didn't want to juice his presentation by making this statement, which I had written down. He's one of the best lawyers I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of lawyers, a lot. So I did rule against him once, and I was promptly reversed. That case is still on appeal, though, so I won't make any further comment about it. So we have, when I was in law school, I started after a short stint as a captain on the Nautilus at Disney World. And I was 72. I was 21 years old when I started law school. And there was a guy a little bit older than me, not that much, by the name of Earhart, who was a rising professor there. I don't think he had written the evidence code yet. I don't think he had written the most famous evidence book after Guard on evidence, of course, in Florida. And he hadn't become Chuck Earhart yet. He was on his way. But by the time I left law school, I think he was working on the evidence code, probably working on the book. But he is still the leading expert in Florida on evidence and one of the leading experts in the whole country on evidence. His book, according to one of my friends, Mike Coppins, which is way overpriced, is in every litigator, every trial lawyer's office that I know, in every courtroom in this building and throughout the state. And I've had it for years. And he also has another book, which I don't think's in print anymore, called Trial Objections. It's his 800 page book on about 80 pages. It's great. And I have one of those inscribed by him, which I value. I used to tell at pretrial, I said, if you want to know what I look at, if you make an objection, I held up the little book. I said, it's this book. And they say, what is that? And they start writing it down. And I don't know how many were sold, Chuck, but I think most of them were sold through my office because I held up that book and then I held up another judge's book on civil procedure. I look at this book, civil procedure, this book on evidence, and I do what they tell me to do, which is still the case. But in evidence now, I'm more leaning towards if I want to hear it, it's admissible standard. But I haven't completely got there yet. But Chuck has been a regular with a group of lawyers, a couple of law professors, and some DCA judges at a restaurant in the 70s and 80s. Maybe when they changed it to Mike's Cafe, but it was called the F&T. And they had these windows in the front, two tables pushed together. And if you were not a law professor, a DCA judge, a circuit judge, or a couple of different prominent businessmen who grew up with those judges, you didn't get to sit at that table. I went to lunch, usually then in the early days with Stanley Bruce Powell, who's here, who's the guy who hired me, and I'm going to talk about him in a little while, or Dexter Douglas, who was the guy who came back after Stanley hired me and found out that he had a law clerk he didn't know about. But I got admission by being with them, and this may be hard to believe, but I just sat there and listened for years without talking much. Chuck was there, Steve Goldstein was there, Ann Booth was there every day. She would bring Larry Smith or other DCA judges. Judge Miner was there. Federal judges would come. Different trial lawyers were there. And I can't tell you any stories about what was discussed at that table because I think the statute has not yet run on that. But everything was discussed there among the judges. Judge Miner, over about 2 years, gave us a blow-by-blow of this play he was writing and later played it on Broadway with Ruby Dee as the actress in it. The play was called Too Much Chain to Swim With. I believe I might be one of the only 2 or 3 people in the room that know this story. Stanley Bruce Powell had a case that was reversed by Judge Miner, and I think on his petition for rehearing, he might have said, the court's opinion is too much chain to swim with. He still didn't get it reversed, but he got Judge Miner's attention because he was on the first DCA at the time. But one day, Dexter and I in the 80s had this trial, and it was a very serious trial. Again, the same case I met Dr. Monosophy in, and it was really serious. And we were trying to get something into evidence, and the judge wouldn't let us. And walking to the F&T, I says, Dexter, we're in trouble. I said, we're in trouble. We got to get this in. He says, John, look, we're going to have lunch. Then we're going to go back and give him a new argument and try to change his mind. So don't worry about it. And so Chuck Earhart was at the table that day. And we spent the whole lunch trying to convince Chuck, I don't know if Chuck even remembers this, to come to the courtroom and sit behind us when we brought this evidentiary topic back up, because we figured if he was behind us, Judge McClure would say, hey, he must agree with him. But Chuck is he's an impartial person, and he declined that invitation. But we did go back, we did a different argument, and we got whatever the evidence was. And so Chuck is also a regular and the star attraction at a Mexican restaurant on Monroe Street, right, Charlie? Every Wednesday. And it's called, Charlie calls it Lunch with the Prof. And judges go there, lawyers go there, some non-lawyers go there, a whole range of group of people go there. And Marty Fitzpatrick told me he couldn't make it, but if you want to talk about his docket, he said you could. But all sorts of people go there. We have a good time. And that's unusual. I don't know that that's ever been done in town. I've been here for over 50 years. I've never known of any similar occasion. Charlie Dodson runs that. One time he had us at a buffet that was so bad, Mike Coppins objected to it. And another last thing before we go to Chuck, he and I used to go to Premiere at the same time. I've got to get back there. And when Chuck was there, he'd usually be riding the bicycle, reading often the Wall Street Journal. There would usually be a line of lawyers lined up asking him questions about either a case or evidence or another topic on which he is an expert, FSU sports. And Chuck, you may not know this, but Chuck's influence on FSU sports goes way back. And I'll let, if he wants to talk about it, he can. But so anyway, Chuck, I would have bet money that you were my criminal law teacher in law school until you told me you never taught criminal law. So I don't know who I took criminal law from. Who? It wasn't him, because I would know him. I can't recall. It might have been one of those new ones they shipped in and shipped out in 1 year. But I had the guy that was there for evidence 1 year, and then he disappeared. And but Chuck was a known presence in the law school all the time. He is considered. We had our 50-year reunion of my class graduating from law school. Everybody there sang his praises. And there's a retired judge in Tampa. I hope I don't steal this story from you, Chuck, but he says there's a judge, I'm not going to mention who it was, but in this one trial, she required the lawyers to quote the page of every book of my book for every objection they made in her trial. I'll tell you a little secret. That was Claudia Eisel, who was in my class. And she was sitting at our table, and she said, yep, that was me. So with no further ado, Chuck Earhart.
Thank you, John. The rest of that story there were two lawyers who came up to me during a CLE. One was Bill Wagner, who was a prominent plaintiff's lawyer from Tampa, and the other was Ben Hill, who had a big civil defense firm, transactional. They were laughing, and they told me this story that lawyers in their firm were required to quote the page number, and one of the lawyers said, "And my guy had an old edition." It took him to lunch to get the right edition to know what was going on. John, I think, graduated from law school, started his legal career at a very good time. In the 70s, there was no internet, there were no computers, there was no Westlaw, there was no electronic filing. Almost all lawyers had offices near the courthouse. If you wanted to file something, somebody had to go to the clerk's office and file it. And that meant most lawyers were in the downtown area. And where are we going to eat? And as John indicated, one of the prime eating places was a Greek restaurant called the F&T. And the advantage of that, for me, for other lawyers, was that's where you got to meet the rest of the bar, and you got to know judges were human beings. You talk about sports, you talk about cases, whatever came up. But I don't know anybody who is a more frequent customer in the F&T than John. Didn't you tell me, John, you used to eat 3 meals a day there?
This is my story that I'm going to tell, but I ate with Ann Booth and her husband Edgar breakfast, lunch, and dinner at least 1,000 times.
No, and for what a great opportunity for a young lawyer to go into the F&T and meet other lawyers and judges. And naturally, you talked about cases. I mean, you talked about other things as well. John went to work for Dexter Douglas. And John, as I was listening, a lot of Dexter's rubbed off. No, that's positive. Dexter, for those of you, most of you probably don't know Dexter. But he was a character with a big personality, fun to be around, one of the leading trial lawyers in that time in Tallahassee. And you went to work right out of law school for Dexter, right? Yeah. And was trained as a trial lawyer really by Dexter. He left Dexter's firm and opened with Mike Coppins and Lloyd Monroe their own firm, and then got elected to the circuit court, replacing Ted Steinmeier. I called Ted yesterday and told Ted that I was going to be down here for John's retirement. And he was so happy and asked me to tell John what a good job he thought John had done. And he said, Chuck, he said, I knew about this and I was going to try to come down for it, but physically I just couldn't do it. But he took Ted Steinmeier's spot and has served since that time. And Ted, your predecessor, was happy that you are in that slot. I've been fortunate enough. I know I've spoken to judges all over the state regularly and know judges all over the state. Leon County is different from almost every other county in the state because it's Leon County. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, where's the state capital? Leon County. Where is venue when you sue in the state? In Leon County. If you're in Orlando, Tampa, Miami, you don't get Bush v. Gore. You don't get any of the suits against the state. I mean, you're doing civil, you're doing civil. John, as I perused his record, was happy to get these rather high-profile cases involving the state. In fact, I used to like to watch him on TV sometimes explaining his rulings. But among the cases that he's decided were one of the first face mask cases during COVID, whether the Department of Education can enter an order barring face masks in public schools. As John said, I was involved for a long time in athletics at Florida State. I was the head of the athletic committee, involved in getting us in the ACC. I think we all know John had the ACC FSU dispute that probably is not over yet. And within the last month, or maybe 2 months, he invalidated 200,000 signatures, or upheld the invalidation of 200,000 signatures to get legalized marijuana on the ballot. He didn't shy from those cases. He was happy to decide those cases. And as I say, in the rest of the state, circuit judges would never get close to any of that. So John, from the F&T days until today, I join with Ted Steinmeier in saying a job well done. Thank you.
By the way, I still have in my office a stack of emails like that, the most vile, disgusting, threatening emails you've ever received from people unhappy with my decision in the face mask case. Oh, yes. Except for Jamie Ito. She sent me a nice one. Where's Jamie? There she is. You didn't think I read it, did you? I also got a death threat, and I had Leon County Sheriff's car outside my house on a regular basis for several months. I was packing the 357, which Frank Allman can tell you I don't carry, but I was for a few months. And then I just decided to look, I'm in my 70s. I've had a long life. What am I doing? So I stopped doing that. Stanley Powell also taught me how to be a trial lawyer too. We were together. He hired me as a law clerk. I've got to tell a Stanley story out of order. I'm sure he doesn't remember this, but when I was a brand new lawyer, my wife and I used to sit and watch Masterpiece Theater on Sunday night, and I would read what was in the advance sheets, which we didn't have Law Week. You know, Southern Reporter would send out a paperback copy of Southern Reporter, the advance sheets, and I'd read all the ones through there. And I read one case that Let me summarize it. It says John Cooper committed malpractice. I said, oh God. I got up. My wife and I lived in a duplex off Park Avenue. I drove down to the building. We didn't have a computer, and I researched and everything I could find. Florida statutes annotated, the digest, all of those things. I could find nothing. So the next day I went in and I saw Dexter. I says, Dexter, God, I've committed malpractice. He says, I got one question for you. I said, what's that? He says, have you told anybody? I said, no, I haven't. He says, don't. Go research it and see if you really committed it. Well, I did tell Stanley. He went into the library with me and spent that morning researching with me. And we found, I was so freaked out, everything I saw said John Cooper committed malpractice on it. And we found a couple of Supreme Court cases that says even though the statute says 2 and 2 is 4, it's really 3. And he didn't have to do that. Dexter was a great mentor, but that wasn't Dexter's style. He was like, don't worry about it, go fix it. And did I tell you I thought you were a lawyer story yet? I don't think so. This is, I think, after Stanley went over to Niceville where he grew up. We represented Mobile Home Industries. Tell me if I've told it, because I've told it to a lot of people over the years. It was the largest mobile home retailer at that time in the country, and it was 7 or 8 southeastern states, including Louisiana. And at under 30 years old, I was tasked to redraft the retail installment sales contracts for homes and lots to make sure we charged the highest rate allowable by state law and federal law, and I didn't violate any of the laws that applied to retail installment sales contracts. We didn't have a computer to research in our office. That's a massive project. I lived at the FSU Law School reading Reg Z. Those of you who've ever done usury, Reg Z, and I did everything I could. I called a guy with Commercial Credit Company who was a big lender in those days. I said, can I borrow your forms? And he did. And none of them are copyrighted. But I did some Louisiana forms, and I said, all right, I sent Dexter a memo. I says, Dexter, it seems like I've told this today. No? Okay. I suggest we hire a lawyer in Louisiana because the law is so different there just to check this out to make sure it's okay. I got back on I know I was telling Stanley this earlier. I got back on my memo with a red felt tip pen that says, I thought you were a lawyer. And what you had to know about Dexter is just wait a few days and bring it up in the afternoon when he was always in a good mood, never the morning. And then he said, okay. He eventually said, okay, go hire a lawyer in Louisiana. So when you work with people, you learn how to get things done in different ways. What doesn't, like he told me about the evidence, what doesn't work this morning, maybe will work after lunch. So much for that. Mary Cruikshank. Mary Cruikshank worked with Dexter briefly and with me, and we have been good friends for 35 years. I know she doesn't look it, but she's much younger than me. And her husband, Rex, is here. I've known Rex for 35 years. And she was in the firm then. I went one way. She went another way into a different firm and ended up starting her own firm, which she still has had these many years later. She is an expert in workers' comp law and in tort defense law. she was one of the 3 co-persons on my campaign. And when we went to our different firms, she would volunteer and go with us, Gwen Atkins, Lloyd Monroe, other people around the state to law enforcement seminars, county commission, city commission seminars, and we would lecture on employment law. Mary sometimes would lecture on workers' comp. The favorite lecture was our sexual harassment lecture. And for some reason, Mary picked me to be the harasser every time. But she's a very good friend, a loyal friend, Mary Cruikshank.
I think John picked me always to be the harassee, is how it actually went. I know that I'm here to honor John Cooper today, and I'm going to get to that, I promise. But before I do need to recognize that I am beyond honored to be slated in the middle of this lineup of speakers today. Just stellar, brilliant minds, and I hope some of that will rub off on me today as I'm up here. Honorable John Cooper. Where to start? I met John in May of 1991, and as he said, almost 35 years ago. It seems absolutely impossible that I've known John for that long. I didn't even yet have my ticket to practice law when I met him back in 1991, and he and Mike Coppins interviewed me at the behest of my good friend, Michael Spellman, who I don't know is in here. There he is. Thank you, Michael. It's true that John Cooper really had to convince Dexter Douglas to hire me. And that was because I had two nearly unforgivable traits and aspirations. The first one was that I was then living in an unmarried state with my now longtime husband, Rex Adams. That was bad, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the second problem. And that was that I had made the grave mistake in the interview to admit that one day I might want to be a judge. And apparently both of these things were extreme sins in Mr. Douglas's book. Deal-breaking sins, I thought, maybe at the time. But out of respect and great admiration for the late Mr. Douglas, I will not repeat and quote what he said about that latter fault of mine. Something about only idiots wanting to be judges or something like that. I left that interview with really a lot of confidence, as you can imagine. But somehow John worked his magic and convinced Dexter Douglas to hire me. And from then on, started a career-long mentorship with John. I saw very early on that John had 2 invaluable traits. The first of which was that he was extraordinarily smart. He was book smart, but also common sense smart. And you either have that or you don't. And John did and does, as everyone here knows. But he also had an incredibly strong work ethic. I knew that I would never match John Cooper's smarts, even working with him for over a year or 2. But I did know that I could work hard. And I thought if I did that under John's tutelage, then I at least had a chance of being a decent lawyer someday. When I spoke at John's investiture 22 years ago, I talked all about the things that he had taught me up to that point, and I had only been practicing law 11 or 12 years at that point. But even by then, John had, on more than one occasion, when I was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was not cut out to be a lawyer, I wasn't smart enough, I just couldn't do it, he talked me in not quitting the practice, to keep working at it, always encouraging me to stay with it thankfully I did. Also, when my law partner, Christopher Dubois, and I decided to start our own practice, John was our biggest cheerleader and our best advisor. We have been at it for nearly 30 years now, and Christopher and I both still give great credit to Judge Cooper for helping us set our firm up correctly at the get-go. It made it a much better start for us. John has also been a bit of a financial mentor to me. Very early on, telling me to save money, invest money. We talked a lot about shares of stock over the years. He told me to always have set aside enough money to make it in the event of the unexpected. I really took this to heart, Judge Cooper. And to illustrate this point, I wore today the same shoes that I bought and wore to your investiture 22 years ago. Now, I have been sold and resold 3 or 4 times now. See? But having them resold 3 or 4 times is a heck of a lot cheaper than buying 3 or 4 new pairs of women's shoes. But when Judge asked me to speak here today, I was honored beyond words, of course, but I realized that I did not really know that much about Judge Cooper or John Cooper, the judge. I had, over the course of the years, been invited by John to come over and sit through a few jury trials early on when I thought I might start doing a different area of practice. And I really just wanted to see him do his thing as a judge. And I noticed something very unique right away, and that was the atmosphere that John created in his courtroom. There was just a feel in the Judge Cooper courtroom. He made the jurors feel very appreciated for their service, always checking on them to make sure they were comfortable in an otherwise uncomfortable setting. He always spoke with respect and kindness to the lawyers in front of him and their clients. And he never took an opportunity to embarrass a lawyer in front of their client, and never took an opportunity to elevate himself in the courtroom. Plus, John's pretty funny, as everyone can see and know. He brought a lot of levity to the courtroom when there were some stressful situations. But anyways, Judge, since my observations of you as a judge have been pretty limited over the years, I thought, I'm going to need to do a little digging on this fellow, John Cooper, the judge. And so I decided to do some investigatory work, and I called around town and I spoke with a bunch of lawyers that I know or was told practice in front of you with some degree of regularity. And I promised when I undertook this job to, no matter what, good, bad, indifference, I was going to write down verbatim everything that was said to me about Judge Cooper. And then I was going to share it today in front of you, in front of all of your family and your friends, all your colleagues, no matter what. And so Ann and Karen, Morgan, I probably should have given y'all a little bit of heads up about this before you got here. But to back up, to get these lawyers to talk, though, when I called, I had to promise very strict anonymity and confidentiality. We had to pull down the cone of silence for these conversations about the Honorable John Cooper. But boy, oh boy, once I promised the anonymity, the floodgates opened. I could not get these lawyers to stop talking about you. Apparently, they had 22 years of feelings to unload. So I wrote it down. So I'm going to share some of the key oft repeated words and phrases that were used to describe the Honorable John Curtis Cooper. And in honor of your 22 years on the bench, I selected 22, just 22, of the many words and descriptors that were used for you. So, Judge Cooper, are you ready to hear this? All right, buckle up. Survey says top of the list of excellent judges, consummate judge, ideal judge, a judge's judge, fair, even-handed, balanced, grounded, down to earth, always followed the law, always 100% prepared, win or lose, guaranteed a fair shake, never forgot what it was like to be a practicing lawyer, called balls and strikes, never played favorites, calm, perfect temperament, supreme ability to connect with everyone in his courtroom, understanding, kind, erudite, and maybe most important in my mind, humble. Even Google AI describes you as a, quote, rigorous and independent jurist and one of the most consequential circuit judges in the state of Florida. Wow, even the Googles got it correct. But John, truly not one person that I spoke with had one negative word to say about you, because I would have written it down and said it today. That speaks volumes, and that is your legacy. I'm going to give a quick quote from one of my favorite movies, Last Black Man in San Francisco. I'm not sure this is the first time this phrase was said, but one of the characters in that movie said, "No one is just one thing." And I think that that phrase describes you to a T. You, my friend, are 1,000 things. In closing, I'm going to do something a little unorthodox. I wrote and am going to sing you a song today. Just kidding. I'd clear the room in 2 seconds if I did that. And plus, my poor husband might keel over. He knows what kind of a singer I am. Anyways, I did write you a poem. And with your permission, I'm going to read it. All right. This is called Ode to Super Cooper. My mentor, my friend, so many things I have learned from you, but I'll hit just the highlights here so that to my allotted 5 minutes, which I've obviously overshot, I remain true. As a brand new budding lawyer, I was able to see firsthand what it was to be not just another lawyer, but one of the most exceptional to beat the band. Every word you employed was of import. Through your diligence, no stone left unturned. You worked your craft with precision, tedium and long hours of no concern. I thank you for teaching me early what, as lawyers and humans, we are called to do, to conduct ourselves with integrity and with fierce commitment to our oaths, stay true. After a distinguished legal career, you transitioned to the bench. Ruling with blind impartiality for you was a cinch. Ask any lawyer in our community to describe your judicial air, and all will say with unanimity, your courage and tact are beyond compare. But you've been not just a mentor to me, JC, but a confidant and loyal friend. Over the years, we've encountered some obstacles, no doubt, but our friendship unshakable in the end. Like the time, or maybe two, I forgot to meet you for breakfast. To my poor excuse, you gave short shrift. But pretty soon, and after a bit or a whole heck of a lot of groveling, you allowed that big boulder of disappointment to shift. We've weathered some storms for sure, but we've had some truly extraordinary times, like the time that plane crashed within inches and we barely escaped its engine turbines. We've traveled the roads of Florida and discovered the world's finest pizza pie. You've enlightened me on the magic of compound interest. You've given me wings with which to fly. I could write 1,000 stanzas. I could share 1,000,000 words today. But for the honor of your enduring friendship, John, I simply can never repay. Godspeed to you on the next chapter of your wonderful life.
One time, Mary asked me to go down in South Florida where she had a case, and she had 7 or 8 boxes of files, and my job was to carry the files in and set them down in front of the judge and then walk out of the room. I think she prevailed on that point. And we did actually find what Mary said was the best pizza she'd ever eaten. Maybe it was that trip. Every time we tell the plane story, it gets closer and closer and closer. It was about a mile away when it first started. So thanks, Mary. And Michael, thank you for answering all those questions correctly. All right, so next, Mark Walker. Mark was a circuit judge before he became a federal judge. His office was next to mine, and we spent a lot of time together. I spent a lot of time in his office turning pieces of paper and pens and pencils to see if he could figure out what I had turned, and he knew within seconds everything I had turned. He became a really good friend. He's got 2 sweet, beautiful daughters, just like me. I told him to only keep his daughters in in-state soccer and summer programs, but he didn't listen to me. And now one of them is going to school in England and the other one's in New York City. So, but they're great successes, just like my daughters have been. And we're both very proud of our daughters. Mark is only one of 2 judges, I think ever, but at least since I've been around, and that's over 50 years, who has run for election for an open seat and had no opponent. One time, we decided we were going out to the airport and check out a World War II B-17 bomber, and we were going to fly in it. And his daughter, Sarah, who I think was about 13, went with us, and Sarah had a book to read during the boring moments of it. The plane stopped. I got on first. Sarah was behind me. Mark was behind Sarah. And the minute I got in that door, claustrophobia swept over me like a wave. And I'm thinking, I am not going to make it on this plane. And I turned around and I looked at Sarah and I said, oh, I've got to go. Sarah is going to think ill of me if I don't. So I climbed in the plane. I got into the radio department where I could actually stand up, and we made the flight. I'll let Mark tell you what his version of the flight was, but he crawled through the smallest hole I've ever seen on a plane to get down into that bubble thing where the machine gunners were. And I thought he'd never make it out because it bothered me just watching him do it. So we'll do that. Maybe he'll tell you the rest of the story. But we also spent Christmas together some years ago in London. And we stayed at the FSU student housing. And Mark and Karen came a little bit later than us. And I felt really rough. Mark got there, felt rough. Karen looked like she had just come from an Elle magazine model shoot. And both the kids were with them, and they were just down the hallway. Tom Lager was there. Tom Lager says, John, my wife and I fly a lot. I'm going to give you a tip to keep you from getting sick. Take this something vitamin C stuff. He says it's airborne C or something like that. Tom was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. He said, you take that, you will not get sick. So like a day or two later, we go over to his apartment. He and his wife are sick as dogs. And I think Karen picked up a cold from him that manifested itself when she got back to, were you in Paris? You were not in Paris. You were in Colorado then. But I says, Tom, what happened to this vitamin C stuff? He says, well, I must have had this before I left. But Tom's not with us any longer, but he was a law school classmate of mine. Great guy. He was older than me. He had been a pilot. He was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam War. He was a big guy. And we always used to marvel how he got into that airplane he flew. And he was a scholarship basketball player at FSU, good lawyer, not a guy you'd want to mess around with if he wasn't your friend, but he was a friend. He loved Mark. He used to invite Mark out to his house on Sunday sometime, and we would chat. But he was also there too. So it was a great time. But Mark and I keep up. Our schedules are such that we're always doing something different, but we do talk a lot. I run into his wife occasionally, but she's as busy as Mark is. And his kids are off doing, what's the school that Emily's in, Mark? Durham, getting her PhD in archaeology at Durham. She turned down Oxford to go to Durham because they had a better major professor there in her area. And his other daughter is a lawyer. So, but we seem to have a lot in common. His dad worked in a grocery store for his career. My dad owned a grocery store for his career. We're both excellent runners, right, Mark? That's an inside story, but we'll tell that later at a breakout session. But Mark Walker, my good friend.
I've got to say that I'm a little disoriented because I am now a federal judge, and I think I heard Mr. Richards say that judges are not infallible. That's confusing. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the plane because the fact of the matter is Cooper and I were in the back of the plane whimpering like small girls while the small girl was running around the plane very excited to be there. But I would rather relate a story of great heroism that involves Judge Cooper, because he mentioned we were in London, and after Christmas lunch, we were all walking back to the apartments. And I thought it was a bright idea to pull out a wad of pounds to hand money to a rather erratic panhandler. And my daughters, who were very small, were very nervous. And Judge Cooper jumps out and holds his arms out and says, "Stand back." And as we're walking down the street, much to my chagrin, my youngest, Emily, looks at me and says, "Judge Cooper saved us." And it gets better, because the next year we're in France and we're on this rather deserted street. And Emily is looking a little odd. And I say to her, "What's wrong?" And she goes, "Well, is it safe to be here?" And I go, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "Well, Judge Cooper's not with us." After I told her I was buying her nothing on the trip, if she continued to repeat that, I just gave up and decided that Judge Cooper, as the great protector, would be part of our family lore. It's an honor to be here and speak on behalf of my good friend, Judge Cooper. This, of course, is where I started my judicial career, and it's good to be home. As I mentioned, and as many of you know, I'm a federal judge, and the federal judges that I all work with are brilliant. Just ask them, they'll tell you. But I can say without hesitation that the finest judges with whom I've ever served are the judges here on the Second Circuit, and I'm confident that this circuit will continue to lead the way throughout the history of the state. And I know that because of the addition of incredible talent like my good friend, Judge Beato, who recently joined the court. But we're here to talk about Judge Cooper. And when I talk about good judges, I think we can all agree that, and I can say without hesitation, that Judge Cooper is the best of the best. To put it in terms that my friends from Battle Pony, Judges Marsh, Judge Frank, and Judge Flory will understand, if Judge Cooper was a bourbon, he would be Pappy Van Winkle. And don't worry, Judge Cooper, I'm not going to start calling you Pappy. That'd be a little creepy. Nobody's other than Judge Cooper alluded to it, but it's important to recognize that Judge Cooper, of course, was first elected in 2002 without opposition. I think the fact that he was elected without opposition is a testament to the fact that he was held in such high regard as a lawyer that no one would run against him. And he certainly has not disappointed any of us. I asked the chief and court administration to check on some statistics for me, and they provided me all sorts of data, which I won't go through, but one number did stick with me. Judge Cooper has resolved over 27,000 cases since he's been here on the bench. Everything from foreclosures to complex constitutional challenges. And the prof talked about Judge Cooper not shying away from the significant cases that got publicity. But here's the thing about Judge Cooper. I don't think it matters whether it's a small suit involving a small amount of money or a huge constitutional challenge. I think he's treated every case that he's had in front of him as the most important case on his docket. I think if you ask any lawyer, the lawyers that Ms. Cruikshank spoke to, they'll tell you that Judge Cooper has always studied the file before every hearing, and he knows the facts and law better than any of the lawyers that are appearing in front of him. It's hard to think about the Second Circuit without Judge Cooper. It's like Larry Bird leaving the Boston Celtics. That's not real original. I borrowed that from Judge Cooper. At Larry Bird's retirement, Magic Johnson said Larry only ever told him one lie, that there would never be another Larry Bird. Of course, Magic Johnson replied that there would never, ever be another Larry Bird. And the same goes for you, Judge Cooper. I can say with all certainty there will never be another Judge Cooper. Judges don't get jerseys. If they did, we would retire Judge Cooper. So I did the next best thing. I got Larry Bird's jersey for. I wanted to remind him of the work he did here in his place in the history of the Second Circuit. You don't have to put it on now. Judge Cooper has worked so hard for so long, it's difficult to imagine him in retirement. It's probably even more difficult for Ms. Cooper to imagine him in retirement. But I hope he'll draw inspiration from a note that he told me about years ago that he got from his younger daughter when she was a little girl. She wrote, quote, "My father likes to buy big cars, go on huge vacations, and take me to the fair." So, Judge Cooper, it's my fervent hope that your retirement will be filled with big cars, huge vacations, and you can take your daughters to the fair again, perhaps this time in Paris, which is a bit of an upgrade. And on a final note, sadly, my father no longer recognizes me, so I know it's important that we shouldn't leave things unsaid. Judge Dotson loves to tell the story, and he's told it quite a few times, that one day Judge Cooper was trash talking about something, another trade he shares with Larry Bird. And I said, I love Judge Cooper, but, and Judge Dotson interrupted me, he said, "You love Judge Cooper?" Because I like Judge Cooper, but you love Judge Cooper. And I'm going to be subject to even greater ridicule. I can even already hear Charlie Dotson. But I can honestly say I do love Judge Cooper. I love him like a younger brother would love his older brother, in this case, a much older brother. I certainly consider it one of the great blessings of my life that you've been my mentor, my colleague, and my friend. And to quote one of the great scholars of our time, Forrest Gump, that's all I've got to say about that.
So, since you brought up Charlie Dodson, he wanted to say this, but he's not had a chance to do that. Charlie, would you like to tell the group what my most notable accomplishment is at the Second Circuit involving the third floor area? I'll take what I can get. So, next, but not last or least, is Nina is my colleague and my great friend. She also helped me in my campaign for judge. And she's always a supportive friend to practically everybody in the whole circuit. I said once that not only has Nina know everybody in the circuit, she may have hugged everybody in the circuit. But she, this last year in particular, we both have made an effort to see each other, talk, because we knew we weren't going to get a chance to do this forever. And her husband, Curtis, a great guy. Usually about 8 o'clock, he calls and say, "Where are you?" And we're still in Nina's office. And, but I go by and see her. She comes by and sees me all the time. She's told me about her dad. I got to call my niece because I think my niece was at FSU in the School of Music when her dad was a professor there, and lots of other things. And so we don't get a lot of people like Nina in our lives. She's a great person and a great firm. I don't know who's nicer, Cecil Davis or Nina. Is Cecil still in here? Cecil's really a nice person too, super nice, but he doesn't come by my office any. But Nina is one of the nicest people I know. And so I'm going to turn the next and last speaker over, not counting me, of course.
Thank you. To the chief, to esteemed colleagues, to family, friends, I am so honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be one of your speakers because you have so many friends that love you in our circuit. So again, I'm very honored. We go back almost over 30 years. And before I was elected, I practiced labor and employment law. And John Cooper was known as one of the most respected and most knowledgeable attorneys. His firm, all the attorneys in his firm were very, very known and respected. When he ran for office, it was an honor to be on his committee. We call it, as a matter of fact, other candidates have said, I want a Cooper-esque campaign. I know that when Mark Walker ran, and I also was working on Mark Walker's campaign, we literally had an intentional strategy to follow Judge Cooper's campaign. And guess what? It worked because Mark Walker also did not have an opponent following the template set by Judge Cooper. So let me begin. Yes, thank you. Hey, Deputy, I do need that. Well, they say that you should not believe everything that you see on AI. But when I was starting to look, just in thinking about my comments, I put in Judge John C. Cooper. And let me show you what popped up. Why? Who knew? Who knew? Wow. So let me talk about the man, the myth. Okay. First of all, he is truly a great judge. And what's interesting is all of us who are here, who've known him for so many years, we still believe that. After years of conversations and confidences, working with him, being with him, I can truly tell you that he believes in the integrity of the law. He has followed the judicial canons. He is a man of honesty. He truly cares about getting it right. There is no judge that loves the law and being a judge more than Judge Cooper. He is here till 8. I know his poor wife. We are being live streamed and it's also being recorded. And Paula, I hope you hear this. We know that you are a wife that is lonely at night because where is Judge Cooper? He is at the courthouse till 8 o'clock at night. Curtis calls me and gets me out, but it has been such a joy to be able to talk with you at night, decompress from the day. You are also one of my mentors. I enjoy bouncing things off of you. When I was on the ethics committee, I would often run questions by Judge Cooper, and he always gave me sound advice and for some of the written opinions that I had to do. He is a man of integrity and fairness. He has a commitment to justice that has always been absolute. He approaches every case, no matter how complex or minor, with unwavering integrity and deep commitment. And for all of us that have worked with you, visited with you, the ripple effect of your teaching and mentoring, not only myself, but whether it's a colleague or a lawyer, your impact has been felt, will always be felt. It has a ripple effect. You also have a brilliant legal mind. Sorry, Paula, I know. So you do. What I have come into Judge Cooper's office on very high publicity, complex cases, and he is in the books. He is in the statute books. He doesn't rely on anyone else to do his own research, and his opinions show it. Somehow he's able to translate a complex civil case and write it in a way that all of us can understand. He truly cares about getting it right. He truly cares about being a judge's judge. Beyond his rulings, Judge Cooper has been an incredible role model on how to, the work ethic, the commitment to justice, the commitment to being a learned judge, to be diligent in one's work, to be courteous and respectful. That is and has impacted a generation of legal professionals. So now I know I could go on, but I'm the last speaker, and I know that there is a reception across the hall that everyone wants to be able to talk to you. So I will get to a couple of points. One, I want to thank you for your friendship. I spoke at your investiture, and it means so much to me that I am now speaking at your retirement. I spoke of your parents, and I know that they are in heaven watching over you today at this moment, so proud of all that you've accomplished. You represent your dad and mom and all of their sacrifice, and you have lived up to all of their expectations. I know that. I mentioned his mom at his investiture because she had passed just shortly before he had his ceremony. I wanted to bring up a couple of things that I'm going to miss about you. So every day he would leave the office and he would have a very ugly box. And we would tell him, can we buy you a briefcase? Can we get you a rolling briefcase? And he literally would leave the courthouse just like this. I am going to miss being in your office. And I know other colleagues, same. He had a turntable, good old fashioned turntable, and we would listen to albums. And so if you mentioned, oh, I love the Beatles, he would pull out a Beatle album, play it for you. I mean, he and Elle, his best friend slash sister, we just packed up on this past Sunday his album collection. It took us 4 hours, 24 boxes of albums. He has an amazing album collection. So I'm going to miss that, listening to some phenomenal sounds in your office. And you are a great collector. You have a great collection. Another going to miss hearing about the family. I love this very old picture of your family, but you always heard about the family. To the daughters, he just so proud of the girls. We always heard about the girls, always heard about how proud he is of his daughters. And I'm going to miss those conversations, but don't worry, I'll know where to find you at the mediation firm. Mary Cruikshank talked about it, but make sure you get some investment advice from him. He always, and this is from Elle. Elle brought this, the little book of common sense investing. He is one of our most successful judges with his investments. And so I'm going to miss those conversations. And so thank you for sharing all that. And if you all didn't know, he was a soccer player on a soccer team. So I brought a picture. Elle brought it for us, and that a soccer ball. So if you didn't know, he was an avid runner and he was on a local soccer team. And I believe that that's probably why you needed a knee replacement recently. I couldn't find that good old toy called Operation, but guess what? I found a sock with Operation on it. I'm going to really miss hearing about all your ailments. I am. I'm going to miss it. And you can wear the sock, but I am very, very honored to call you my friend. I am so honored to be here to celebrate you and recognize you. Thank you for being an example to us all. I wish you the best. And I did want to present you with a robe as you leave, okay? Can you come up so I can present? Okay. My friend, we're all worried about you because you are such a workaholic, but this is the only kind of robe we want to see you wearing from this point on, right? A Superman Snuggie. Get into your recliner. I hope your daughter helps you with that because he's such a workaholic.
She sits in it when she's here.
Okay, so we want you to just relax, enjoy your retirement, slow down a little bit, okay?
I'll have to talk to my new bosses, the Osteens.
Okay, all right. Please talk to them. All right, so with that, Godspeed, God bless you. We love you.
Thank you. Reminds me of Frank Allman's investiture, where he had a robe on his back. So, all right, I have to go to the bathroom, so this will be short. So I just have a few remarks, and then I'll close it out because I know we're getting timely. first, I don't know if the state attorney is still here, but I've got this story about his dad. If he's not here, would y'all please pass it on to Jack? But when I was running for judge, Sheriff Campbell is one of the first persons I went to see. I put on a suit and I went out to his office and I met with him. I said, Sheriff, would you please support me? And if anybody from the state attorney's office, the attorney general's office, or whatever comes to you, just tell them you're supporting me. He says, we had gotten to know each other in various types of litigation that I had represented law enforcement in. He's a good guy. And he used to mispronounce attorneys' names on purpose all the time, which I thought was great because it would drive them crazy. But he said, John, I'll support you, but I got to tell you something. If you get an opponent, I'm going to take you to some places you've probably never been, and you cannot wear a suit there. So you got to get some better clothes than what you're wearing now for campaigning. I said, I will, Sheriff. And then he was very nice to me. And I used to see him at the gym too. I saw then Chief McNeil, who was TPD chief, and I had the same conversation with him. Always very nice to me. And I said jokingly to him, I wasn't serious, could I place my campaign posters on the side of all the patrol cars? And he looked at me in a straight face, says, John, I'm not sure we can accomplish that. But he was always helpful, great client too. I want to say a couple things about some special people that are here, so I'm going to skip over some of these things I did last night at 2 a.m. After my first year in law school, we had this program called the Oxford Study Program. Now it's the oldest, as I understand, the oldest American law school Oxford program in existence. I was in the first one. And when I was over there, Rich Livingston, one of the guys over there, he says, John, are you interested in being a law clerk? I said, yeah, I would be interested in that. And he said, well, I know these guys, they're looking for a law clerk, and their name's Douglas and Powell. And he gave me the information. I said, okay, I'll check it out. And so when I got back, I put on my red blazer, which wasn't, even then wasn't that stylish. And I went over there with no appointment, and I walk in, and Stanley Bruce Powell was there. Dexter was not there. I met Stanley. He interviewed me. He gave me a job on the spot. And I was happy to get that $1 an hour he was paying. So, but he turned me into actually a lawyer. No license. I didn't sign anything, but a lawyer almost overnight in giving me responsibility. He says, we got this case, and says, I want you to draft a complaint on the case. And so that's what I did. I met Janice Piotrowski then, who was Dexter's, I keep saying judicial assistant, but his, I'm going to say paralegal. I'm updating the language, his paralegal. And then I later met Roberta, who was on maternity leave at the time, and she came back. And Dexter and Stanley were good, but they were nothing compared to Janice and Roberta. They are the best, smartest lawyers I've ever known. And I would practice with them anytime. And Roberta and I, again, Roberta, I don't know if you remember this, but for a while there, every day about 9 or 10, we would walk down to the F&T and have coffee and talk about whatever books we were reading, or Roberta was into jogging. I was trying to learn about jogging. And then we'd come back to the office and work. And then when Roberta moved to Niceville with Stanley, I spent most every afternoon, almost every day, just going down to Janice's office and talking with her. And she'd tell me what was going on. I would talk to Dexter too, but I talked more to Janice than Dexter. Janice probably knew this, but Mike Coppins and I told every new person who came in the firm, do not put yourself between you and Janice with Dexter, because you will lose. He values her higher than anybody in this firm, and we would all be toast if you did that. And that's true. Dexter talked a big game lots of times, but I have lots of stories which I'm not going to tell. So, but Janice was special. She was in high school with Judge Browning from the 1st District. And Janice, when I had my knee replaced, Edwin's grandson was my physical therapist. He said, I'm from Madison. Nobody knows me over here. I said, I know your grandfather. So Janice and Roberta, oh my goodness. It's incredible. I told them, and if they have time, I want to take them and show them. Roberta had this little file table about this high by her, like a bookshelf that you could put books in or file folders in next to her desk. When she left about 1979 or 80, I went and took it and put it in my office. I later paid Dexter for it when I left and set up my firm, which is normal. It's not unusual. And Mary Cruikshank is the only person in town who has an exact replica of that, because she liked it so much. She wanted one, and I had a carpenter come in and he measured it and made one for her at that time at an incredibly cheap price. But it's been in my office for 45 years. And it's going home with me. So anyway, when I got to law school, I said, I'm not smart enough for this place. I've got all these Ivy League people, Harvard, all these professors claim they went to Yale. But Harvard, Yale, Princeton, etc. And one war hero, Tom Lager, scholarship athletes, Tom Lager, Ken Hart, who ran the Owsley firm. Y'all may not know this. He was a scholarship football player for the FSU football team. And a bunch of college professors. Kathy Levitz was a college professor. There was some guy who smoked a pipe all the time in the student lounge. He was a college professor. And I'm thinking, there's no way I'm making it here. Well, I made it there somehow. Then when I started as a lawyer, I said, there's no way I'm making it here. Then I didn't say that as a judge, but I felt like every time I made a mistake as a judge, I got the same feeling you get when you commit malpractice as a lawyer. And it's not a good one. So Stanley took me everywhere. The first 4 years I practiced law, we went to Panama City to take depositions. We went to Pensacola. We went all over the place. He introduced me to all the lawyers he knew. I saw lawyers like Bob Irvin, Will Varn, Bubba Smith, who later became a circuit judge, Jay Hall, whose office I sit in now, who was a circuit judge. All kinds of people. And we did all kinds of crazy things, again, which I'm not going to talk about. We went down to Miami to all sorts of seminars, then plaintiff's lawyer seminars. Ken Davis was one of Stanley's friends, would go down there. Lots of Tallahassee people. John Kamenez went down there. And one time, I'm going to tell a tail end of this story. Ken had to speak the next morning at about 8 in the morning. Well, it got decided. I was just a kid. It got decided we were going to be out so late, we wouldn't get back till about 7:30 from the house we had left, friends of Stanley and Ken's. We pulled in about 7:30. Stanley and I got about an hour's sleep. Ken went to his thing with no sleep to his meeting. Stanley was sitting at the table, and he says, you see this spot right here on my face? I said, yeah. He says, that's the only part of my body that doesn't hurt. That's a true story. So the F&T, I learned so much. I learned a lot from Stanley. Dexter too. Dexter spoke at my investiture and told all the law enforcement people about all the times I had sued law enforcement, which got me good with everybody. And Judge Stafford was there. His son, Bill Stafford, who's a great lawyer here in town, sent me, Judge Stafford, as you know, passed away recently, sent me a copy of his speech at my investiture. And he said, I told Frank Allman about this. He nodded because I've made this quote many times, and I'm going to hone it down even more than I have here. He said that he acknowledged that I tried one of the first civil trials he tried as a federal judge, and I know my last civil trial I tried before him. Eventually got the lawyer disbarred, but that's another story. But Judge Stafford said, and this was a thought I'd never thought of. He said, talking about trial lawyers, he said that you are from them, although you are no longer of them, which is a good way to summarize what judges are. I, however, have lived long enough to be from the judges, and in 3 or 4 days, no longer of them. I'm going to be of the Osteen firm. Sorry, I couldn't resist a little plug there. So I'm going to mediate, by the way, if you didn't guess afterwards. So the last year or two, Ms. Ito, many of you who practice in front of me have heard numerous stories. And I tell these stories for a purpose, and I'm going to end with one last story to try to explain to the lawyers today who don't know each other, who only see each other on a TV or a computer monitor, they don't have the opportunity to become friends. They think somehow there's something wrong with that. When I was a brand new lawyer, I filed a personal injury case, and the lawyer on the other side did not answer it within 30 days. And I went to Stanley Powell and I said, Stanley, this guy has not answered and I'm going to default him. He says, stop right there. He says, 2 rules. 1, we don't default lawyers if we know there's a lawyer on the case. And rule number 2, we never default Edgar. Never. Edgar was Edgar Booth, who was a great lawyer, was always on the defense side, but we all were good friends. Edgar Booth and Jay Hall, who was a circuit judge, we rode together to depositions and examining locations all the time. We didn't go separately. We ate lunch constantly together. Edgar and Ann became great friends, as did Jay. Every time Jay got a chance, if my wife was around, he would compliment me to her. We were seeing The King and I one night at FSU. He turned around and says, your son's a good lawyer. He's going to go far. And then Edgar and Ann ate breakfast at the F&T every day and ate lunch there every day. Chuck can attest to the lunch. Ann and Edgar ate dinner there every day, Monday through Friday. When I was a young lawyer, I got up, went to work early. Yes, Frank, before 10:30 or 11. I went to lunch early, and I would often go down to the F&T and eat breakfast. I ate lunch there every day, and then I would work late at night till like 7 or 8, and I'd eat dinner down there. I'm not kidding. I think Ann Booth, who those of you who don't know, was a district court judge for many years, and I bet I ate 1,000 meals with him at least. We spent a lot of time just talking. Ann introduced me. Every time there was a new judge at the first DCA, she would bring them down and introduce them to me. She was just, we traveled, Jay Hall, me, Frank Santry, Murray Wadsworth, and Steve Turner all traveled to New Orleans to argue a case at the first the Fifth Circuit before the 11th Circuit. It was an antitrust case. And Jay Hall spent an entire lunch explaining to me the fine art of making French onion soup. And if you know Jay, you know that's not a surprise. But he's a great guy. In my office, no judge has ever occupied that office that did not practice law with Dexter Douglas. Never. And so an error's going to pass because I'm the last man standing. There's nobody left. But all these things, what Stanley taught me about not defaulting Edgar, who is a great lawyer, became a good friend, and he did so much for me in my career. So much. I could have ruined it with one ill-timed rookie mistake. When I went to judge school, they asked us, there were 200 people in there. They said, how many here would set aside a default in these circumstances? About 3 of us raised our hands. And they said, why? And I related the Edgar story. I've told people that story, Stanley, for years. And it's true. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Frank, I'm sure you have some more remarks about my wonderfulness. And feel free to expound.
We do have some cards we all signed we want to give you, but I want to thank all of you for coming. We have a reception next door in courtroom 2F, so please join us for some fellowship and some more stories. Thank you.